Is it really Jesus or just a chewy cracker? Maybe it's time we wrestle with faith, symbolism, and spiritual gatekeeping in the Catholic Church and talk about reclaiming rituals that can still bring us together. Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. This is my favorite part of these weekly presentations because it gives me a chance to dig a little deeper into something that came up during the main presentation. Okay, let's just go there, shall we? Do you really believe that's Jesus? Like in the bread, on the plate? Do you picture him just chilling in the tabernacle all week, waiting to be eaten again? It's one of those questions that lives in the back of the mind for a lot of Catholics. Kind of like, does eating fish on Friday during Lent actually make God happy? You're not supposed to ask it out loud because it sounds disrespectful, but that's exactly why we should talk about it. So here's the deal. The Catholic Church teaches that during Mass, the bread and wine don't just represent Jesus, they actually become his body and blood. Not in a poetic, oh, that's a pleasant image kind of way. In a metaphysical change of substance, even though all the physical properties remain the same kind of way. That's what they call transubstantiation. Not to be confused with transmogrification, which is what Calvin and Hobbes do when they morph into monsters in the comic strip. But if you ask most Catholics, especially the Creaster Catholics, the one who only go to church on Christmas and Easter, they're like, yeah, no, it's symbolic, obviously. And here's where it gets interesting. Why is that such a problem? If a huge percentage of Catholics don't buy the official explanation and they still show up, they still receive communion and try to be decent people, why does the church get so bent out of shape about how they believe? Why does it matter so much that we all agree on this very specific, very supernatural point of theological doctrine? That's what we're going to explore in this episode of Afterthoughts, because maybe this isn't really about bread at all. Maybe it's about control. A few years ago, I was facilitating a table discussion at a workshop for parents whose kids were preparing for First Communion. I figured it'd be a chance to help them feel more confident teaching their children about this beautiful and sacred mystery. But what happened absolutely floored me at the time. Of the 6 parents at my table, 5 said, very casually, mind you, that they thought the Eucharist was just a symbol. One of them had heard something about transubstantiation, but didn't buy it. Now, these weren't lazy parents. These were thoughtful, involved parents. They were eager to help their kids learn about their faith. But when it came to what the church calls the source and summit of the Christian life, right, the Eucharist, they were like, I think it's symbolic. So let me start by laying out what the church actually teaches. According to Catholic doctrine, when the priest says the words of consecration during Mass, a miracle occurs. The bread and wine literally become the body and blood of Jesus. It isn't metaphor. It isn't poetry. The Catholic Church teaches that this is a metaphysical transformation, even though the appearance, what they call the accidents, remains unchanged. Scientifically, it's still bread and wine, but spiritually, says the Church, it's something entirely different. Now, here's the thing. A 2019 Pew Research study found that only about 31% of U.S. Catholics believed in transubstantiation. And more recent studies suggest that belief might be higher among those who attend Mass weekly, so about 63%. But that still means that nearly 4 in 10 regular Mass goers don't believe what they're technically supposed to believe. That's a pretty big gap. The church teaches this elaborate metaphysical doctrine. But most people, they're just trying to be good people and take communion and make it to brunch before the crowd. And honestly, can you blame them? Now, the real presence of Jesus, when they talk about the real presence rather than transubstantiation, real presence sounds warm and mystical, like something sacred and mysterious. Transubstantiation, though, that sounds maybe like a spell that Harry Potter isn't allowed to use outside of Hogwarts. Right? You half expect someone to shout out, Corpus Christi, while they wave their wand. And to make things even weirder, some anti-Catholic Protestants still call Catholics cannibals because they think Catholics believe they're literally eating flesh and drinking blood. But the funny thing is, no Catholic really believes that. So if no one thinks it turns into actual meat and wine blood, why does the church cling so tightly to this complicated claim? That's the question we need to think about, because the answer might have more to do with power and control than with anything spiritual. So, why does the church care so much about whether everyone believes that the bread and wine actually become Jesus? I mean, if almost half of regular mass goers just quietly disagree or just haven't really thought about it, wouldn't that be a clue that maybe this whole thing could use a little breathing room? And yet, church leadership holds on tightly and insisting that everyone must believe in transubstantiation. Why? Well, let's name the not-so-sacred elephant in the room: control. See, uniform belief isn't just about theology. It's about compliance. When you can draw a hard line between those who believe the right thing and those who don't, well, it creates a very convenient tool for managing people. It allows the clergy to position themselves as the gatekeepers of God's grace. Right? We hold the power to make this bread holy, and you only get to access it if you follow our rules. And let's be honest, once you set up that kind of dynamic, it becomes really hard to let go of it, no matter how silly the rules might seem. I think the deeper question here is whether this is about spiritual unity or just about institutional obedience, because those aren't the same thing. Spiritual unity can happen between people with wildly different ideas, as long as there's shared love, shared purpose, and a good dose of compassion. Right? Institutional obedience, on the other hand, well, that demands conformity. It says, believe this, say this, act this way, or you're out. And that's not unity. That's just enforcement. And seriously, what are they afraid of? Do they think the magical wafer spell won't work unless everyone is chanting the exact same words in Latin and believing the exact same thing? Like some Vatican-approved Hogwarts incantation, right? I'm pretty sure that's not how grace would work if it's really a thing. If there is a divine being and that divine being really wanted everyone to think exactly the same way about some mystery or another, wouldn't they have made us a little less, I don't know, a little less human? Because last I checked, humans have always wrestled with mystery. It's kind of our thing. So maybe the Catholic Church's obsession with transubstantiation says less about the holiness of the Eucharist and more about the Church's fear of letting people think for themselves. If that's the case, then it's definitely worth paying attention to. You ever notice how some traditional Catholics, trad Catholics as they're called, how so many of them get really upset over the tiniest things when it comes to communion? Like their blood pressure spikes if a priest changes one word in the Eucharistic prayer, or if someone walks up for communion who shouldn't, say a divorced person, or someone who supports marriage equality, or someone who didn't genuflect at the right angle. I don't know. It's like they think God is up there with a clipboard checking off infractions like some liturgical hall monitor. And here's the thing. Even when you meet someone who has memorized every word of the church's teachings on the Eucharist, like they know the definition of transubstantiation, they've got it down cold, they usually can't actually explain what it means. Not in a way that makes any kind of real-world sense. They tend to fall back on, well, that's what Catholics are supposed to believe, which is basically religious shorthand for, please don't ask me any more questions. And that's what makes this so interesting, I guess. When someone clings that tightly to the rules, especially rules they don't fully understand, it's not usually about mystery or meaning. It's probably about identity. It's about certainty. It's about being on the right side of the line, no matter what that line's actually drawn around. This is dogmatic thinking at its core. Rule following over relationship building. It's less about becoming a more loving human being and more about checking all the right doctrinal boxes so you can feel safe, righteous, and, let's be honest, a little better than everyone else. So here's an invitation. If you find yourself getting tense about someone doing it wrong, maybe pause and ask, is your spirituality rooted in connection or in control? Are you growing in compassion or just getting better at compliance? Because if there is a God, and that God really is love, as so many Christians claim, and love is patient, kind, and not easily angered, then maybe Christians should worry less about enforcing perfect mythological practices and focus more on fostering authentic relationships. Just a thought. One thing I want you to know is that it's okay if you don't believe in transubstantiation. It's okay if you've never really bought into the idea that the bread and wine literally become the body and blood of Christ. And it's okay if, deep down, you think it's symbolic or emotional or cultural, or maybe just a quiet moment you enjoy because the music is nice. It doesn't make you a bad Catholic or a bad person. It makes you honest. And I think that matters a whole lot more. One of the most beautiful things I've learned is that people with very different beliefs can still sit at the same table, literally and metaphorically. We don't all need to agree on the metaphysics to share a meal, to share a memory or a moment of meaning. What we do need are shared values. Things like compassion, humility, gratitude, and the willingness to make room for others. Beliefs can divide us, but shared values can bring us together. Think about all the other rituals we do that are powerful without being literal. Lighting a candle for someone who's passed. Clinking glasses in a toast. Singing happy birthday off key while someone tries to act surprised when you bring out the cake. None of those require magical thinking. They just carry meaning because we bring meaning to them. Rituals like that are about connection. They're not about whether you did it properly or not. So if you're ever wondering whether you qualify to receive communion or if you believe enough, just take a breath. The deeper truth is that meaning matters more than the supposed metaphysics of it all. If the ritual helps you show up with love, humility, and a heart that's open to others, that's the real miracle. So here's the heart of it all. Shared rituals can still unite us, even when we don't all believe the same things. That's not a problem to fix. That's something to celebrate. Because the beauty of reclaiming a ritual through the lens of a values-based Christian is that you get to hold on to the meaning while letting go of the mythology. You get to keep what matters, the connection, the community, the reminder of who we are and of what we value. When we look at Eucharist or communion from a values-based perspective, we stop worrying about whether the bread is Jesus, and we start asking, what kind of people do we become when we share this meal? Now, the answer should be, we become people who are more inclusive, more generous, more aware that we belong to each other, because that's the real miracle. And if you're not sure that's what the church was going for, just look at the gospel they choose for the feast of Corpus Christi, the feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus told the apostles to feed the 5,000, there was no theological exam to see who got fed. There was no purity test. It was just a hungry crowd and a challenge. You give them something to eat. It's a shame the church has wandered so far from that simple call. But we don't have to. We can still reclaim the ritual. We can still gather around the table because the power of communion doesn't come from a doctrinal formula. It comes from what we do with the story and how we show up for one another around the table. Well, thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. If you want to keep up on everything I'm doing, please head over to thecodaproject.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get notifications whenever I publish anything, and you'll also keep updated on the weekly live streams of Mythologizing the Bible. Also, if you subscribe for free over at thecodaproject.com, you'll start receiving my weekly resource called The Weekly Compass. This is a brief, once-a-week guide on a single core value. Think of it as a mini lesson plan for personal growth. It's perfect for families, students, and adults because I include discussion questions designed for each age group. So each weekly issue centers on a short reflection about the week's value, followed by discussion questions that are tailored for different age groups, from kids to college students to adults, and then a simple take action step, like a small challenge or exercise you can do to put that value into practice. Especially for families, it's designed to be an easy way to ensure that at least once a week, you're making time to talk about morality, ethics, and core values. So if you're interested, go subscribe for free at thecodaproject.com. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truth.